You don't ignore her texts because you're busy. You ignore them because nothing inside you moves when they arrive. This is not cruelty. It's not insecurity either. It's something colder, quieter, and far more deliberate. The world calls men like you emotionally unavailable, but that phrase misses the point. Unavailable suggests absence. You are present, just untouched. The core psychology here isn't apathy. It's detachment, a trained, reinforced disengagement from emotional dependency. You've learned, consciously or not, that emotional intensity fades, that excitement decays, that desire obeys the law of hedonic adaptation. What once thrilled you now barely registers. Attention becomes noise, affection becomes background radiation. Validation loses its chemical punch. Other men chase because they are still wired for emotional reward. Their dopamine spikes with novelty, approval, pursuit. Yours doesn't. You don't feel empty, you feel regulated. Somewhere along the line, you built an internal economy where autonomy pays better than attachment. Control feels safer than connection. Silence feels cleaner than explanation. So when a woman enters your orbit, you don't rush toward her. You don't lean in. You don't adjust your rhythm to accommodate her emotions. Not because you can't, because you don't see the return on investment. Here's the paradox. Your indifference doesn't repel, it destabilizes. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to emotional asymmetry. When one person cares less, they unconsciously occupy the higher status position. You aren't signaling dominance, you're signaling non-need, and non-need reads as power. She notices it immediately, the lack of urgency, the absence of pursuit, the way your attention doesn't inflate when she offers herself. Her nervous system searches for familiar patterns. Where is the hook? Where is the chase? There is none, and that absence becomes the stimulus. You don't reward proximity with reassurance. You don't punish distance with jealousy. You remain internally neutral. To her, this feels like standing in front of a locked door with no handle. Not rejected, just unanswered. Mini story. She laughs harder than necessary, shares something personal earlier than she planned, waits an extra minute before replying, hoping you'll notice. You do notice, you just don't act on it. Because you've learned something most people haven't. Emotional engagement is optional. At some point, you decoupled your self-worth from female response. Not in a dramatic way, in a slow, almost invisible recalibration. Attachment theory would call this avoidant, but that's incomplete. Avoidance implies fear. What drives you is optimization. You minimize emotional volatility the same way an engineer minimizes friction. Caring too much introduces unpredictability, mood swings, expectation, loss of leverage. You prefer clean lines, clear boundaries, internal sovereignty. This is why women can't tell if you're uninterested or just restrained, because you don't leak emotion. And in a culture addicted to emotional leakage, that feels profound. Rule card. The person who needs less controls the frame. But here's the shadow. Detachment works until it doesn't. The same mechanism that protects you from emotional dependency also flattens meaning. Not immediately, gradually. You start to experience relationships as interchangeable experiences instead of encounters. Faces blur, stories repeat, and eventually indifference stops feeling like power and starts feeling like distance. That distance is where the next layer begins. Because when you don't care about women, the real question isn't what they feel, it's what you are quietly avoiding. And that's where Chapter 2 opens.
Indifference doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rearranges the emotional hierarchy. When you don't care, you don't react. And when you don't react, other people fill the silence with meaning. This is where indifference begins to feel like power, not loud power, structural power. Attachment theory explains it cleanly. Anxious attachment seeks closeness to regulate emotion. Avoidant attachment regulates emotion by avoiding closeness. When these two meet, gravity forms. The anxious moves closer, the avoidant stays still. Motion creates imbalance, and imbalance creates obsession. You don't raise your voice, you don't set ultimatums, you simply fail to respond with the expected intensity. That absence forces the other person inward. They start monitoring themselves, replaying interactions, adjusting behavior. Not because you demanded it, because uncertainty is cognitively expensive. Emotional scarcity works like economic scarcity. The less available something feels, the more value the mind assigns to it. Your attention becomes a rare resource, your approval a currency. You never say, "Earn me." Your nervous system already did. Mini story. She sends a message she's rewritten 3 times, deletes one sentence, adds another. You reply hours later. Neutral tone. No questions. She tells herself she doesn't care, then checks her phone again. This is asymmetrical investment. You remained emotionally liquid, she becomes emotionally leveraged. The irony is that you didn't design this consciously. You simply refused to overextend, and restraint is often mistaken for confidence. Here's the deeper layer. Not caring doesn't just affect her perception of you, it reshapes your perception of relationships. You begin to experience emotional distance as clarity. No drama, no confusion. You tell yourself you've outgrown attachment, that you're above needing validation, but what you've really done is outsource intimacy to control. Control is predictable. People are not, so you choose the former. Over time, women stop feeling like individuals. They become variables, inputs and outputs. Interest rises, you pull back. Interest drops, you disengage completely. You call it standards, but it's actually insulation. There's a hidden cost to this posture. You don't notice it at first because nothing breaks. What fades is resonance, the feeling that someone actually reaches you. When connection threatens your autonomy, you preemptively withdraw, not in panic, in preference. And so you maintain power, but lose depth. Rule card. Emotional control trades intensity for safety. Eventually, someone appears who doesn't chase, who doesn't escalate, who mirrors your distance perfectly. And for the first time, indifference doesn't feel powerful, it feels invisible. No imbalance, no tension, no one waiting. Just you uninterrupted, and the uncomfortable realization that power without connection has no witness. That's where this story actually ends.